Hello, my name is Carlos Pascual, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this additional session of our CERAWeek Conversations. This is an exclusive series with people who are leaders in energy and public policy and finance and technology, people who have been at the center of historic transformations that we're going through today on energy transition, on recovery from the pandemic. And today we have an opportunity to have a conversation with one of those leaders at the center of the world's energy system, Mohammad Barkindo, the Secretary General of OPEC. Mohammad, it's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for having me. Good to see you.
Today, the Secretary General and I would like to take you through a conversation that runs through the stress that we've seen in markets, the geopolitical implications of that, but also looks at the future of energy production, of oil and gas production, and of governance. And Secretary General, if I could begin with an existential question. As a result of the pandemic, as a result of the oil price war, many have said that at times OPEC has faced the threat of destruction. But how did it feel from the inside, and how did you manage this process that resulted from the combination of these two threats just coming together?
Thank you very much, Carlos. This is a very, very important question that immediately sent my mind back to the events of the past couple of months. When we met, I believe it was in Davos at the World Economic Forum, little did we know that we were facing these unparalleled times ahead. We, for the first time in many, many decades, came to face a double whammy, as you say in the US, of demand as well as supply shocks of unparalleled proportions. And did we prepare ourselves for this? Well, I can say that we had the mechanism of the Declaration of Cooperation in place way back in December of 2016 as a result of the last downturn. And we had worked with this mechanism in the last 4 years with our partners in the non-OPEC. Therefore, we did not need to reinvent the wheel. We decided to rely on this same mechanism, this same framework, but trying to cope with the proportions that we faced, and hence the historic decisions in April the 9th and the 12th to adjust supply globally by 9.7 million barrels a day. But already we were facing projections of nearly 30 million demand contraction in the month of April, and between 25 to 30 in the second quarter. But it was a good beginning. We tried to cobble together this agreement despite the differences among us, and we welcome the participation of the biggest producers in the world, in particular the United States, that took it upon themselves to ensure that we were able to bridge the gaps between us, to restore communication between us, to finally take this decision, including to the minutest details of the volumes. So we're grateful to the US and other leading producers around the world that rallied around, including the G20.
Let me pick up on that, Secretary General. What produced the change from the meeting at the beginning of March, which couldn't come to an agreement, to being able to bring together the OPEC Plus group and then the G20? Was it the intervention of President Trump, President Putin, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia? Was it the market? Was it a combination of all of these factors? What's the lesson to be drawn here on how to create effective governance around a wide range of countries?
The current governing structure of the Declaration of Cooperation, bringing 24 producing countries together is in itself burdensome in terms of its efficient operations, because each producer, big or small, has one vote. And that gives that country some sort of veto on the decisions taken. Therefore, it was always a huge task to get consensus from all the participating countries. And in March, it was clear it was one of those meetings that we couldn't get consensus, and therefore we had to adjourn to continue consultations among ourselves. But of course, as you rightly said, because of the magnitude, the horrific numbers in the market, the meltdown of the oil market, the stock markets, the financial markets, this is something that was unparalleled. World leaders in the United States, in the Kremlin, in the Royal Court of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in Mexico, in Caracas, in many producing countries had to step in when ministers reached their limits in terms of their ability to compromise, to do some, provide some flexibility. The political leaders normally take over, and their intervention saved the situation. And we saw as a result of their intervention, we were able to reach this agreement, and we saw their participation to the last minute to ensure that that consensus was solid, and we remain grateful. For us, we had always been advocates of a global dialogue in the energy transition. If you recall, in CERAWeek, past several years, we had advocated for this global conversation. And the participation of the United States in particular is of great importance to this transition, as well as the energy transition. As you are aware, thanks to CERAWeek, we were able to reach out to the US independents, and we had established line of communication with them. And I can say at the moment we have reached some level of comfort among ourselves, and they have been participating also at their own levels to ensure that this conversation is inclusive and is led by the biggest producers.
And indeed, you point to an important dynamic here, and you use the word often, conversation. And it's critical because on the one hand, you had countries that are not part of OPEC that can have a conversation with you, but they're not coordinating on strategy, but you understand each other on decisions being taken. And then you have other countries that are within the OPEC plus mechanism where there is an expectation of certain compliance. And that issue of compliance becomes really critical. Is there a key actor or player? Is it your secretariat? How do you manage to maintain compliance with the commitments that get made within the OPEC plus group?
The entire framework, Carlos, is voluntary. That is the fundamental aspect of this declaration of cooperation that brought together countries with diverse backgrounds, diverse national interests and capacities, as well as capabilities. But it is the same countries that decided way back in 2016 that for our decisions to have the credibility that they deserve in the eyes of the market, we needed to put in place a monitoring mechanism. And hence we established the structures of the Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee to work with the Secretariat to ensure that all participating countries comply 100% with their obligations. But still, it is about voluntary obligations. And this has worked in the last 4 years. We have seen compliance levels rising well beyond 100%, both voluntary and involuntary. Now, this time around, there's a new element that is being introduced, because we have gone beyond the OPEC plus. There are countries who are outside this alliance that have come on board to participate with us. And these structures and these compliance mechanisms are new to them. And these are sovereign countries. Therefore, we do understand why some of them may have some challenges subjecting their jurisdiction to outside compliance monitoring by OPEC or by the OPEC, non-OPEC, or by the Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee. But I think there is a growing consensus that taking a decision in terms of volumes, either to increase or to reduce from the market, is one thing. To be able to implement those decisions fully and in a timely manner is also something else. The two have to go together. Therefore, what we are facing now is how to make sure that everyone implements these voluntary obligations 100%. We went further to also institute a new element whereby countries who have some difficulty in 1 month, for example, in the month of May, this is the first month of the implementation, and for some technical or operational reasons, they were only able to make 90%. So we have introduced this element where they can compensate for that 10% in the subsequent months. And we think this is very fair, it's equitable, and it also gives the market the guidance that it requires, that we are very solid on these numbers. These numbers are sacrosanct.
So let's focus on those numbers. As you said, you need to make decisions, and those decisions have to depend on certain criteria and metrics. What are the key metrics that you're looking at right now? Is it the price of Brent? Is it the 5-year averages of stocks? How are you guiding the decisions that the group is making as a whole?
The fundamental objective of both the OPEC and the OPEC Plus is to restore stability to the market by helping to bring supply and demand to some form of balance in the market. One metric that has worked since 2016 has been the stock levels, the inventories, and the 5-year average. The 5-year average of stocks globally, especially in the OECD countries, both in-country and offshore, has given us in the last 4 years a very good indication of the level of stability of the market. We have been able to establish a relationship between these stocks levels and prices. It is clear quantitatively there is a relationship, an inverse relationship, if you like, between these two variables. We have seen throughout the implementation of the Declaration of Cooperation, each time the stock levels go beyond the 5-year average, prices go down south and vice versa. So it has proven to us that we could focus on these metrics to help the market to maintain some relative level of stocks around the 5-year average. And we have also seen that has also stimulated investment as well as confidence in the financial markets.
And is there a price band that you're looking to maintain?
Not at all. We had tried this several years ago, and it has really not worked. And we abandoned it. We have no price objective. We are focusing on the supply and demand balance that would ensure continuous investments in this industry to ensure that security of supply is guaranteed, not only for current, but for future demand growth.
So it brings us to a question that is a challenge to understand from a producer perspective. Every producer wants a higher market share, probably wants higher price. And in the near term, that only works if, particularly for the OPEC plus countries, if US production continues to go down. And of course, it also assumes that there is an increase in demand. So let's take each of those pieces. And right now we see in the United States an increase of COVID cases, talk about a return of lockdowns. How closely are you following this, and what kind of questions is it creating among your members?
Yeah, this is a very important question because the whole crisis is primarily a health crisis. It is a pandemic caused by this virus, which has spread across the globe. And of course, governments responded by shutting down. And we have read your reports. At a point in April, probably more than half of the global population was in one form of lockdown or another. And at the moment, we believe that as we gradually come out of these lockdowns, and hopefully, if we finally get the vaccine and the cure for this virus, we can say that the worst is over and that we will be on path of recovery. The form and shape of this recovery is still subject of discussions. Your discussions with Larry Summers was very, very interesting on these various forms and shapes. For us, we are following very closely developments in the US for obvious reasons. The biggest economy, the biggest producer, before the pandemic has become also one of the biggest exporters. Now, we have also, thanks to you, established this dialogue with the US independents. And we are working with them to understand, to comprehend fully this new normal, which nobody seems to understand. So I want you to be rest assured from our side here, there is no objective whatsoever from us as a group or as individual countries to drive US shale production out of business. No, it is not in our interest to do that. It is not in the interest of the global industry to do that. Without the US shale, probably we could have entered into a worse crisis that we are seeing in this pandemic. Everybody has a role to play. But as you rightly said, we need to balance. We need to balance the various variables. You have supply, you have demand issues compounded by a virus that has triggered a worldwide pandemic and is still ongoing. Therefore, nobody can say for certain what the outlook would be in the short term, let alone the medium term. But we are very much appreciative of the support and the cooperation we are getting from the US, both at the level of policymakers as well as from industry. This industry is a global industry. Without the leadership of the US, it would be impossible for any group of countries to be able to maintain sustainable stability.
So two critical key things there. One is the recognition that the industry is global and there needs to be a global conversation. And secondly, that the way that players operate in that global environment are going to be very different. There's some that are going to be working together in an OPEC plus context, and others who are going to be responding directly to market signals. But still, the conversation is important and helps create insight. And I think that's a critically important point to get across. If I could switch to the demand side, Secretary General, for a second, and China. China has been importing extraordinary amounts of oil, increasing its reserves by what some have calculated at about 2.4 million barrels a day. but at some point they reach a limit to their storage. Is this a worrisome point to watch out for, that somehow this massive source of demand in China reaches a wall where it simply can't continue the pace that it's been moving on?
It applies to the rest of the world as well. It is not only restricted to China. Of course, China is one of the biggest consumers of energy, and in particular oil. And yes, they had taken advantage of the current market conditions to rebuild their stocks, especially their strategic storage. We have seen the massive replenishment they had embarked upon to the tune of almost 2.4 million barrels a day. The last time I checked the numbers, I think they have built up well over 800 million barrels of stocks, and yet they still have some room in the region of about 330 million barrels of storage left. But as we also nearly panicked as a global industry in March, April, that we could easily reach the tank tops globally, so also in China. You cannot invest in storage overnight. It takes time to attract funding, to construct the storage and so on. So it is worrisome if demand does not pick up at a pace that will be able to continue to draw down on these stocks. It is also worrisome, the news filtering out of Beijing, that there may be a second wave sweeping across China at the moment. These are all worrisome. We have to be very vigilant, and we have to continue in the spirit of transparency to share information, to share data. I think it's for the global good. That's all I can say.
We promised Secretary General to talk about the future, and indeed the issue that dominates the future is energy transition and what happens with the way the world responds to climate change. Is energy transition an opportunity or a threat for OPEC?
I think it's a great opportunity, not only for OPEC, but for the global industry and for the global community. This pandemic has proven beyond reasonable doubt that we need to revisit the governance architecture of energy, climate change, and possibly geopolitics. It has also proven beyond any reasonable doubt that multilateralism cannot be replaced in the world of today. So going beyond or post-COVID-19, we need to, as an industry, to dwell in great detail what type of structures we need to have in place, drawing from the experiences of these few months and how the whole world has shaken, in order to not only to avoid future occurrences, but also to put the world on the right pedestal in terms of energy and climate change. We need to really come up with a governance structure that will propel the transition in a climate-friendly fashion. The pandemic is a health pandemic, but it has impacted on the global economy. It has also impacted on climate and the human communities around the world. There is some projections going forward that we cannot continue in the current fashion. And the structures that we have now may not be adequate for us. So it is up to us as industry, as policymakers, as scholars, to get together without any encumbrances, to really take a holistic review of what we have in place. OPEC will be 60 this September. We intend to use this opportunity to review our existence in the last 60 years, where we failed, where we should have done things separately, and how do we adapt to this fast-changing world going forward.
Indeed, Secretary General, many talk about this as an opportunity to accelerate history, to make judgments and investments about how we shape the world to come. And I think when history books are written over your period as Secretary General of OPEC, they will certainly be historic. And when you think about the words that you use, multilateralism, global, the need to address climate change, these are factors that have been new developments that you've brought into OPEC. You still have time left on your term, your second term. And if you look ahead, what is the way that you would want that history to be written about this period of time and where you left OPEC at the end of your term?
Carlos, you are asking me to assess myself and to be my own historian, to share with you what we have been able to modestly achieve in the last several years. That's almost an impossible task. But whatever we have been able to achieve in these epoch-making times have been largely due to great teamwork that we have within the organization. We have been able to rebuild confidence within the organization and camaraderie among member countries that strengthen our hands to reach out to our partners outside of OPEC. Now there's a thin line between OPEC member countries and the non-OPEC countries operating in the Declaration of Cooperation. And sometimes I speak more in a day with the non-OPEC countries than OPEC member countries, and we share information and strategy without any encumbrance between us. We have seen also, as a result of this pandemic, now we are going to even going out to countries beyond the OPEC plus, and we are now talking about a new governance structure possibly going forward. These has been historic times, and I think I will leave that to scholars, future historians, to assess what we have been able to do or what we have failed to do.
Secretary General, thank you for the vision that you have brought to your office, to the way that you've conducted the role of OPEC. You've stressed the role of global conversation, of multilateralism. You've made clear that a price target does not work. You've focused on supply and demand and stability in markets as a way to guide investment decisions that create a better environment for producers and consumers alike. These are phenomenal developments that are taking place that are focused around how markets actually function. You've introduced the concept of climate change into every aspect of your strategy. So these indeed are historic transformations, and we thank you for sharing them with us. As always, it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak with you. Secretary General, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining these CERAWeek conversations.
Thank you.